Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football Memorial Day weekend, but we will certainly not miss an opportunity to talk this Ole Miss program in the transfer portal as they land another very intriguing commitment coming from former Jacksonville State defensive lineman Chris Hardie, who not only brings a ton of production to this Ole Miss defense, he brings a lot of versatility as well. You turn on the film for a guy like Chris Hardie, primarily plays that edge rusher spot, but can kick on into the inside, play that three tech at 6'2", 270. A lot of versatility, a lot of different ways you can use Chris Hardie. And then you talk about the production that he's bringing to this Ole Miss defense: 60 tackles, 16 tackles for a loss, 8.5 sacks, had offers from Oklahoma. UCF was a priority target for a lot of other Power 5 programs across the country. Ole Miss comes in, gets this one done, and I think the conversation that we've had for the last couple of months is Lane Kiffin is doing a beautiful job addressing the areas that this team needed to get addressed heading into 2024. You make no mistake about it. From a roster talent standpoint, this Ole Miss team can be one of the better teams, not only in the SEC, but in the entire country. And I think Lane Kiffin really identified the line of scrimmage play as being that step Ole Miss needs to take heading into 2024. Chris Hardie, just another example of getting that one done. Fired up to get into this kid. He is an extremely intriguing defensive player for this Ole Miss program. Before we get into it, as always, just want to say thank you to you guys, to the Ole Miss fans. It's been no secret that I've had a blast talking this program in the transfer portal, but more importantly, the amount of support you guys have shown the fellas, it truly does mean a lot. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And without further ado, let's get into Chris Hardie. And again, the production speaks for itself. And yeah, you can have questions about making that jump from Jacksonville State to the SEC. One of the first things I look for from Group of 5 transfers making that jump to the best conference in college football is, what have they done against similar level opponents? Jacksonville State played South Carolina in the 2023 year. You look at Chris Hardie's numbers, had 2 sacks in that game. So maybe the question marks that you have about the jump from the Group of 5 to the Power 5 level kind of get mitigated, because you saw Chris Hardie play some damn good football against another SEC team in South Carolina. And you kind of get into what I think Chris Hardie brings to this Ole Miss team. I think it starts with the run defense, right? You talk about 16 tackles for a loss. You start diving into a little bit deeper of the numbers. 30 run stops last year for Jacksonville State. That's an extremely high number for a defensive lineman with an average depth of tackle of only 1.6 yards down the field. When you look at the primary function of why I think Ole Miss went after Chris Hardie, hey, we have to be better against the run. You look at beating teams like Alabama and Georgia, you got to win on first and second down. Chris Hardie is a heavy-handed defensive lineman, especially on the edge. He's a phenomenal at getting off of blocks, winning at the point of attack, and kind of being a factor in the run game. So you look at this Ole Miss team and say, Chris Hardie certainly adding to that physicality and run stopping ability to this Ole Miss front seven. Then you look at him as a pass rusher and say 23 quarterback hurries, 8.5 sacks. And I think you can get really creative in terms of how you use Chris Hardie. And I think the recipe we've always been talking about is Ole Miss stopping the run on first and second down, putting teams in those third and long situations where you have Princely U coming off the edge. You can use Suntarine Perkins in a ton of different ways and potentially kick a guy in Chris Hardie down to that 3 tech with Walter Nolan and say, those are 2 elite pass rushers from the inside of the offensive line. You start looking at Princely U, Walter Nolan, Chris Hardie, Suntarine Perkins, Jared Ivey, all going after the quarterback. That is going to be an extremely difficult task for a lot of offensive lines in the SEC and across the country to be dealing with. And I think the last thing I want to know for a guy like Chris Hardie is he's a reliable commodity. This is a guy that's been at the college level since 2019. He's played over 2,000 snaps during his college football career. He's going to add depth to this defensive line. Is Chris Hardie coming in a bona fide starter? I think he certainly has the capability to be, but at the very least, he's another quality depth piece for this Ole Miss defensive line. And we've talked about this extensively, and it's not always the most exciting conversation to have, but You look at Ole Miss's goals heading into 2024, you make no mistake about it. It is to win an SEC championship. It is to win a national championship in 2024. When you want to win games late in the fourth quarter, late in November, you have to have depth along the line of scrimmage. You look at the teams that have won national championships the last couple of years, the Georgia Bulldogs, Michigan in 2023. One of the common factors you see is depth along both sides of the line of scrimmage. And you look at this Ole Miss defense and you start looking at the depth that they have, not only at the edge rusher position, but on the inside, and say, there are 8, 9, 10 guys that you feel really, really good about for this Ole Miss defensive line. You kind of pull it up. Princely U, JJ, Walter Nolan, Jared Ivey. That is, in my mind, one of the better starting 4 defensive lines that you'll see in the country. But what happens when some of those big bodies need a little bit of a blow? You have guys like Akella Stone or Harris, Cam Franklin as a true freshman. Now you're bringing a guy in Chris Hardie who has played so much football at the college football level, is physically kind of developed going into a 6-year ball. I look at this Ole Miss team and say, not only is it really top-end talented, it also has a ton of depth along the line of scrimmage. I think that's going to be a key factor for this Ole Miss team heading into 2024. I'm fired up about this commitment. I think we're going to do a film breakdown of Chris Hardie, because you turn on the film, so many different ways that I think you can use Chris Hardie, but so many different ways. He's kind of a weapon on that defensive line. You can play him at the 3-tech, play him at that edge rusher spot. He's a hammer against the run. Big-time commitment for Ole Miss, beating out a couple of big-time teams. We'll cut it at that. Appreciate you guys rocking with the boys again. The Ole Miss fans, this has been a blast breaking down all these commitments, and the support you guys continue to show truly does mean a lot. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Hopefully you guys have a phenomenal Memorial Day weekend, and we'll talk to y'all later.